let f of x be defined in the interval between -1 and 1. We want to find the domain of first f of x plus 1. So because x has a domain -1 to 1, we're going to replace x with x plus 1. So that has to be between -1 and 1. So if I subtract all the sides by 1, I get -2 is less than x is less than 0. So that is the domain. Now let's look at f of 1 over x. We know that 1 over x has to be between -1 and 1. And here we have to consider two cases. What if x is negative? In the other case, what if x is positive? Notice that x cannot be 0, because that means that we'll be dividing by 0. So if x is negative, I want to multiply all sides by x. But when I multiply by x, I have to flip the inequality because I'm multiplying by a negative number. So we're going to flip the inequality in both sides. So we have negative x is less than 1 is less than x. Because x is negative, it's obviously going to be less than 1, since 1 is positive. That makes sense. And now let's look at negative x is greater than 1. If I multiply both sides by -1, I get that x is less than -1. Okay, so this is what I need to borrow for this case. Now for the second case, we want to consider when x is positive. So I'm still going to multiply all the sides by x, and the inequality does not flip since x is positive. Because x is positive, well, first, this is what you have to look at. Negative x is less than 1. And then the second part says x is greater than 1. Okay, well, if I multiply by -1 here, I get x is greater than -1, which we said x is less than -1, so we're going to throw this out, and we're going to keep x is greater than 1. So if we combine both cases, we see that the domain is between -infinity to -1, open parentheses, union 1 to positive infinity. So this is our domain. Now let's look at another case. So let's say I have f of square root of x. We know that the square root of x has to be between -1 and 1. So if I square both sides, well, first, before I square both sides, I know that the square root of x is always going to be greater than or equal to 0. There's nothing below the square root of x. So I can replace a -1 with 0, and that's less than or equal to x less than 1. Square all the sides, I get 0 is less than or equal to x less than 1. And this is my domain, which I can write it in interval notation as a bracket, 0, and then 1 with the open parentheses. So that is my domain. Okay. Next case, we're going to be looking at f of x plus 1 over x minus 1. We know that x plus 1 over x minus 1 has to be between -1 and 1. So again, here we have to look at two cases. First, when x minus 1 is negative. Second case, when x minus 1 is positive. So when x minus 1 is negative, I'm going to multiply that to all the sides, and the inequality is going to flip because we're multiplying by a negative. At this point, I'm going to subtract both sides by x plus 1. So something like that. So if negative x minus x is negative 2x, 1 minus 1 is 0. And then x plus 1 minus x plus 1 is 0. X minus x is 0. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. So because here x is negative, we're going to say that, well, 0 is greater than negative 2. Okay, that doesn't really tell us anything. We already know that. So we're going to look at negative 2x greater than 0. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2 and get that x is less than 0. Okay, so that's what I need for the first case. Now for the second case, we're going to consider when x minus 1 is positive. Okay, so then I'm still going to multiply both sides by x minus 1, but the inequality is going to stay the same. And again, I'm going to subtract by quantity x plus 1. And so in this case, we'll have, okay, negative x minus x is negative 2x. 1 minus 1 is 0. Then we get 0. And then here, x minus x is 0. That's negative 2. But since x minus 1 is positive, that means x is greater than 1. So if I look at this case, negative 2x, since x is greater than 1, negative 2x is negative. So it cannot be greater than 0. That does not make any sense. And so in this case, there is no solution. Right? We cannot solve this. So for the domain, we're going to say that x is less than 0, or an interval notation from negative infinity to 0. And that is our domain.